session of the Adobe Accessible Forms training presented by the Idaho Digital Accessibility Consortium. I am, looks like I'm waiting on one more panelist for today, but you may see some new names up here if you've joined us for earlier sessions. Carolyn and Sharina went on vacation with their families, so they are enjoying Hawaii and Florida, and all the good things that come with being in the sunshine. So again, welcome. Nick, do you want me to go ahead and get started? Will you keep an eye out for Aaron?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right, everyone. Again, welcome to this Adobe Forms training on accessible, printable, and fillable PDF forms. This is going to be a little bit different than our previous sessions, but I want to go ahead and jump in here and get started. And I'm having tech issues, of course. All right. So we'll do our best to go along here. We'll have tech issues and missing panelists. It's going to be a day. I would again thank everyone for joining us. Closed captioning is available. Jessica has joined us today and is providing captioning, so feel free to click that live transcript button if you feel that you could benefit from having that text as well. All right. Let me try to get this working properly here. All right. All right, there we go. Tech problem solved for the moment. Okay. Our agenda today, I'm going to recap the series, kind of where we are, how we've gotten here. This will be more of a discussion type of session rather than technical how-to. So we're going to try to help folks better understand the challenges and barriers faced by people with disabilities as it relates to applying digital signatures to PDF forms. And then we're going to define some of those signature alternatives and strategies for implementing some of those alternatives. So joining me today, I'm Lane Amaro with Amaro AT Consulting and the Idaho Assistive Technology Project. And with me today, Earl Hoover from the Idaho Commission for the Blind and Visually Impaired. And so far, Bridget Tietz with the Idaho Technology Services is also with us. And with any luck, Aaron from the Idaho Commission on Aging will also join us here shortly. I've invited these three folks to join us to talk about electronic signatures from the perspective of agency employees and some of the things that have worked for them. But again, I wanted to start with our series review. So as a part of this series, helping folks figure out how they can make accessible, printable, and fillable PDF forms that can be used by just about anybody, we decided to, as presenters, walk through the process of creating a training needs assessment. The desired outcome for this training needs assessment or survey is a form that can be printed to be completed by someone using pen and paper, or a form that can be obtained and completed electronically by anybody, but taking into consideration the needs of assistive technology users. So a form that has the necessary structure to allow assistive technology users to complete that form as well. So far in the series, we've covered, and it sounds pretty simple. It sounds like it should be a pretty straightforward 1-hour session on here's how we do X, Y, and Z. However, it is quite complex. And so far we have covered some tips and tricks for the design process from the very beginning, how to even phrase questions to get the answers that you want, to make those questions clear and concise for those who might be completing it, how to make the source document, so the Microsoft Word version of the survey, accessible, and create the structure that will allow the document to be saved as PDF and maintain some of that structure that is accessible to assistive technology users. Remember, our big push from the very start has been save as PDF. Do not print as PDF. Print as PDF is bad. We've also gone over then, once you have created the Word document, written the questions, created the white space in those documents then, and saved it as a PDF, we covered how to insert the form fields onto the page so that the structure, that electronic structure, exists for assistive technology users. And in our last session, we talked a lot about how to write effective tooltips. Tooltips is the text or the information that is given to assistive technology users completing a form. And often there's a little bit more information provided in that tooltip than just the label. So rather than just saying name, you might say your name or applicant's name or trainee's name, and get so that label name might be visually connected to a heading that says personal information, but assistive technology users may not be able to see that relationship. So that tooltip helps convey that relationship even further. But today we were going to take a break from those technical details and talk about electronic signatures. You'll note that on our training form, we aren't going to be asking for signatures, because that is the first thing I ask people to consider is, does your form actually need somebody to sign it? We've gone through, and if you are able to access the Canvas site, there are some short videos and some additional information if you do choose to add signatures to any form that you create. But we want to talk today about the barriers to those forms. So again, our outcomes for today are to better understand the barriers and challenges faced by assistive technology users when it comes to applying a digital signature, and then identify some strategies that perhaps you could use to help decrease those different barriers and still get the signature that you need. Let's pop over here and stop my screen share. All right. So once again, I'm Lane Amaro with Amaro AT Consulting and the Idaho Assistive Technology Project. And Erin has not been able to join us yet. So I want to give my panelists an opportunity to introduce themselves as well here briefly. I know I did a brief intro about Bridget with the Idaho Technology Services, but Bridget, welcome to the presenters side. If you want to do a quick introduction, that would be amazing.
Sure. How's everybody doing today? So my name's Bridget. I'm with the Information Technology Services with the state of Idaho. My role is the web hosting and application support team lead. And so we get a lot of questions about everything from, making these PDFs accessible to now today's topic about the e-signatures or what can be done, whether it's for accessibility purposes or otherwise. So I'm excited to be here.
Great, thanks, Bridget. My other panelist today is Earl Hoover, and I'm excited he was able to join us so last minute. I texted him about an hour ago and asked if he happened to be available. So huge thank you to Earl for jumping on with us today. The Idaho Commission for the Blind and Visually Impaired. I'm going to just do a quick intro as well.
Sure. Hi, everybody. As she mentioned, my name is Earl Hoover. I am the Assistive Technology and Business Engagement Coordinator here at the Commission for the Blind and Visually Impaired. I'm a white male, middle-aged. So yeah, good to be here. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Earl. And I appreciate the extra little audio description there as well for folks. I forgot to do that again. It's a habit that I'm working on as well. So I am white female and she, her pronouns. And I happen to be wearing a pretty vibrant pink floral shirt this afternoon. So it's in my home office with it's all dark around me as well. So, oh gosh. Okay. I'm a little sad Erin's not with us because she's the one I practiced with the most before going live today. But I think I'll start with Earl. Having the experience you do working with folks who are blind or visually impaired, what are some of the barriers that you or your clients have encountered when it comes to applying a signature to any sort of form?
That's a great question. So with myself, as well as a lot of the clients I work with, of course, they're either blind or visually impaired, and they're using either screen magnification or screen reading technology to access the information. A lot of the challenges are that while PDFs are becoming more accessible, oftentimes a lot of them are still inaccessible. And then if they're able to read the document at all, it's difficult to know what the different fields are as far as their relationship to the form in general, which is why it's so critical to alt tag things in order for us to be able to know what that field is and what information it's asking us to include. With signatures, it can be a little challenging because, of course, with the technology we're using, a lot of times it doesn't seamlessly integrate. So, being able to know where to put your finger to sign can be challenging. Yeah, so that's a start anyway.
Yes, yeah, that's my experience as well, being visually impaired. A lot of the options require hand-eye coordination. And I think about other conditions and other folks I've worked with in the larger disability community outside of blindness and visual impairment. When someone has fine motor control and challenges and they are unable to hold a pen still to write a signature, often there's a similar challenge in creating a signature with a mouse or with a stylus in the electronic space as well. And folks who utilize switch technology to move through, where they're using a switch and sliding to the right or to the left or up or down to move around a document. A lot of the signature options do not interface with those because they are much like using a keyboard. So someone who does not have enough motor control to grip a mouse to move the pointer where they want their signature to be can also be a challenge. And I think the challenges can go even beyond just the end user's physical abilities. The more virtual we've gone, the more I have found, folks, they may have a tablet or a computer where they can receive the document, but they don't have a printer at home so that they can print and handwrite in the form or hand sign the form. Some may have access to a printer at home, but may not have access to a scanner at home. Most are now 3-in-1, but not all. So they may be able to print it, fill it out and sign it, but not scan it back in. And some of those folks said, well, I just used to go down to the library and access the printers and scanners at the library. But now with COVID restrictions, they're finding that to be even more of a challenge. So access to the technologies to actually complete forms and complete signatures is proving to be a bit of a barrier to a lot of folks. Bridget, can you think of any other barriers that maybe Earl and I have missed?
The only thing I can think of is from the technology perspective is, being able to get the focus where it belongs on where the signature is. If it's not built correctly, the focus won't be where it needs to be for the signatures. And I mean, and it's not consistent across technologies, right? Is it gonna like take your name and just script it so it looks like it's a signature, or are you going to be able to actually use your finger or a stylus or what have you? So the technologies vary based on how it's been deployed. So I think that also becomes somewhat of a barrier. And then if there's multiple signatures down a page, does it jump down, or does it automatically populate your signature across all those fields? What if you didn't want to sign one of those fields? So there's a lot of considerations from the electronic perspective.
Right. I see myself here twice, and I don't think I'm actually here twice. So does that mean Erin has joined us?
It very well could mean that.
I think that's what that means this time. Yay! Erin,
that's what happens when you share a link and you're told not to share the link.
Yep. But we got you here. That's what matters. We are still talking about some barriers and challenges. So great time to recap since you just jumped in with us. Earl has joined us, and he talked about the challenges of hand-eye coordination for folks who are visually impaired or blind in accessing forms and documents. And I talked about access to the physical equipment to say print and scan back, as well as some of the fine motor control challenges for folks who have motor control issues. And then Bridget was also talking in general terms of just about the different types of electronic signatures and the technology barriers that those can pose as well. I know that's a really brief overview of what we talked about so far for barriers, but did you have any thoughts that you wanted to add to that?
Is that better?
There you are.
I say, well, coming in without knowing what was already said, it sounds like you guys have talked about a lot of it, and things that we've discussed as well. Everything from, the physical logistics to simply navigating through and just understanding the variety of variables that go into trying to ensure that e-signatures are an option. And it's been one of those challenges we've had since technology began that, and I have to make a disclaimer. I am not an I person. I trained on Microsoft. I use Samsung and stuff, but that's something else. But the good thing about everything Apple is they control their environment. So it is much easier to develop. But when you open it up to the world, you never know exactly what people have. And you don't want to develop things to the lowest common denominator, because then, we go back to the Stone Ages, so to speak. But yeah, the things that you've talked about and things that, we've even run into where I have a document that I'm able to work with on my system, and for some reason others can't, that are seemingly running the same system, becomes challenging. It's one of those that I think we have to continue to press forward on, but also be willing to say, you know, you can't let us stop us. If we need external assistance at the moment, then we can get things done, but it certainly needs improvement.
Yeah, I think this is always going to be a moving target. And I dread a little bit saying that for folks who are coming in looking for an answer, and I don't have an answer. We've got a little bit of a moving target. I do want to say that I think Bridget's really onto something with just the technology itself being a potential barrier. You know, I've been working on the form that Carolyn has created for the series and for the videos that she's done as part of this particular session in the Canvas. And excuse me. And I'm having difficulty creating configuring the ID that I need to in order to apply a digital signature in Adobe. So including the form Erin sent me earlier today that works great for her. So there are definitely there's a lot of considerations. There's some forms I've seen where folks can click fill and sign in Adobe DC, Adobe Acrobat DC. There's a fill and sign tool, and they can click fill and sign, and then they can click sign yourself, and they can choose a signature or their initials. Excuse me. And I don't remember how I set up my signature, but it looks like my handwritten signature. But it requires me to have the hand-eye coordination. Once I click that option, when my mouse goes over my form, I can see my signature, and I have to drag it to an open space where the signature is supposed to go and then click to apply it there. So some people think of that as being their electronic signature. I mentioned this digital signature that I'm having trouble setting up now. And I don't know when I did this or how I did this, but I created, using a service called Komodo, I created an electronic token signature that I imported into Adobe, and I can choose that as my signature. So in a signature field, and that's easy enough for me to apply, but I don't remember how I created it. I can't even remember if that process was accessible to me or not. Considering how much I'm blocking it, I have a feeling it wasn't accessible. I have a feeling it was a little traumatic. But that's considered to be a little bit more secure of a signature because there's some digital communication to a server that says, yes, the signature, came from the person that says, that it says it came from. And then I've also seen some other situations where checking boxes that say, I verify, these statements to be true. I verify under penalty of law, whatever, however firm that statement needs to be, with little check boxes. And then they allow you to type your signature. Earl was just telling me about a process that he's been using lately with Adobe Sign, part of the Adobe services, where, Earl, correct me if I'm wrong, but you walk through a wizard where you can type your name as your signature.
Yeah, so if your agency uses Adobe Sign, unfortunately still a sighted person has to actually do all the formatting. But once the document is created and you send it out to your target audience, they receive an email, and the email has two links. One allows you to read a screen reader version of the document. And then once you've read it, you go back to the email and there's a separate link that you click to sign it. And then once you click that link, it runs you through kind of like a wizard, and there's a dialog box that has several different tabs for different types of signature options, and one of which is typing, where if I pick the typing tab, I can just tab to a text box field where I just type in my name and click apply, and it applies that as my signature. And then I just tab to, click here to sign, press enter, and bam, it's done. And then it emails the document signed back to the sender.
Earl, this is Aaron, and it
Yes.
does, as you said, have different tabs. So you could use a pre-configured signature of some sort, it sounds like, and have some of the different options we've been talking about.
Yeah, so you can either, there's a tab where you can import a token signature. There's a tab where you can actually, draw your own signature. Or, there's a typing tab. There's a few others as well.
So it sounds like Adobe has picked up on what we've all been discussing, which is so many options, so little time.
Yes.
Yeah.
No perfect single solution, but maybe they're putting it into a package where at least we have all of those options at once.
Yeah, what we're finding though is for folks that are using screen reader technology, that Adobe sign process can be a bit confusing. So we actually have a direction sheet that we basically will email to that target client just before the document, so they can read the directions and figure out how to read the document and how to sign it.
I think I've actually experienced at least one of those where you're right. There were a couple of links and I was clicking and it wasn't doing what I thought it should do. And it took a while to figure it out.
Yeah.
Yeah, lots and lots of options. And one of the things that always comes up, one of the questions creators always tell me or ask me is, I've been told by my agency or my supervisor that we cannot accept a digital signature. It has to be a wet or a handwritten signature. How do we accommodate this? And a lot of times this is related to someone's interpretation of HIPAA and FERPA regulations that are applicable to their agency. So I always redirect folks to their lawyers. I am not a lawyer. I have no ambitions to become a lawyer. But I do understand there are legal implications there. And I do know, and on the resources page of our PowerPoint, there's actually a link to some information, excuse me, specific about the FERPA, the education and privacy, and the application of electronic signatures. But Bridget, is there anything within state statute that agencies in particular should be aware of when it comes to rights, responsibilities, abilities with electronic signatures?
So there are statutes already surrounding electronic signatures, and in my experience is, we have a statute which I can post in the chat, but you also need to look at your own agency's legal requirements, because I have worked with an agency who has in statute that it requires wet signatures and sometimes 2 signatures and or notary. So you really need to look at your own processes associated with your agency to make sure that you can just adopt the globally usable e-signature law before you actually just start applying it.
Thanks, Bridget. I was just trying to find that link to see if I could drop it in the chat.
I got you.
That our agency is an example, Commission on Aging. has several different things that need to happen for a lot of programs. They're not, I don't want to say not official, but they don't require a lot of highly secure, highly confirmed signatures. But then, of course, we do work with things like adult protective services and long-term care ombudsman that deal with some highly sensitive issues, paperwork, cases that do apply or need to apply HIPAA regulations. So even within an organization, there can obviously be a lot of different levels of e-signatures that may be appropriate or not.
Yeah, and it can be difficult to balance all of those legal considerations. And a lot of people, and a lot of organizations, not saying good or bad one way or the other here, I've seen it where organizations will ignore accessibility requirements in order to meet privacy requirements. So then the question becomes, how do we do both? Because legally we need to be doing both. They're equally as important. We've talked about some of those strategies already, and those, again, I would encourage folks to talk to legal teams about, because you got to figure out what constitutes that legal digital signature within a particular company, agency, organization. What I have found to be the most accessible and universal has been the I verify sort of checkbox statements. And let me see if I can share my screen again. I apologize. I've been sick all week and I'm starting to fade here. So see if I can share this document and give you an example. I'm going to just go ahead and share my entire screen. So here's our needs assessment survey. And I did not share my screen reader because you're already going to be having enough trouble listening to me today. But I can jump to checkboxes at the bottom. So I verify that the statements in this document are true to the best of my ability, and then being able to check that, and then type or print signature. And when Carolyn added these form fields, she added tooltips. So the tooltip being, I verify that the statements in this document are true to the best of my ability, and then please type or print your signature. So using type or print makes that something that could be something done by someone who's at the computer and able to type it, or for someone who has printed it and who is completing it by hand. You see 3 different options here as well. So this first one says electronic signatures are not accepted. Please print, sign, and scan this document back in. And it's important to be aware that if you ask folks to do this, the document you get back will no longer be accessible. It will be text extracted from an image. And as most of you are finding, this isn't an easy process to create an effectively tagged and structured document. Your average person on the other end isn't going to be able to apply that structure themselves, which can only be done with Adobe Acrobat Pro or Acrobat DC. It cannot be done with Acrobat Reader, which is what most people are using to view and sign these documents, because they're not paying the $300 upfront, or the $100 a year to the subscription to have access to Acrobat. So as one thing to kind of keep in mind. If you ask them to scan it back, what you get back will not be accessible. I'm going to tap on this field here. My tooltip just read electronic signatures accepted. Select the field to attach your signature. So when I press enter, I get a dialog box that appears telling me I can sign with the digital ID. I have already established a digital ID. And again, I cannot remember if that process was accessible or not, but I chose as an individual to create, to pay a service to create and maintain this electronic signature for me. Again, excuse me, I chose to do that as an individual who does freelance and needs to apply electronic signatures quite a bit. That was something that was worth it to me financially, but may not be for your average signatory or your average client. But here I can just tap continue. And I can review my details, click sign, and now I have an electronic signature in the document. So it can be accessible when done correctly. I'm gonna drop the link, maybe. See if I can get over there. Or Nick, if you can grab the link to Carolyn's YouTube video for the folks who aren't in Canvas. Again, apologies. Those were the three strategies, though, that Carolyn and I came up with that would be easy enough to implement into a pretty basic form. The YouTube video has more details on how you can add those to your form and the steps that you would need to take on the backside as a creator. One of the other strategies that we were unable to implement, but that you may consider exploring are the digital signature services. Adobe Sign, DocuScan, eSign, I think there's some others. I do know that DocuSign has been going to a lot of work in the last year to improve the accessibility of their signature process. I want to open it up now for the panelists, and anything else you guys want to add before we open up the discussion to the rest of our audience.
I'll add that the state has a new contract with Adobe, and with that comes Adobe Sign. And maybe some of you who are on the call from the various agencies have already seen that there's an Adobe Days coming where the Adobe folks are doing some training. So that will help if you've not used it before, then perhaps some of these questions that we have, you know, with how this is being used, but also how to actually do this, maybe can be answered through attending some of the Adobe Days stuff, which I will put a link to it in the chat so that you can sign up and do the various trainings.
Fabulous, thank you. Yeah, I don't think people can ever get enough training in this stuff. There's so much to be learned, and everybody has different processes. So I want to make sure that if you're a state employee, to take a peek at those. Earl, Aaron, did you guys have anything you wanted to add before we open it up, before I ask the big question and try to get audience participation here?
My only advice is to, you know your audience, know your purpose, know your specific, not only agency or organization, but maybe program requirements or limitations, and do your best to meet them all. That's not meant to be a joke, but we all know that that can be a little more challenging sometimes than we'd hope it would be.
Earl, how about you? Did you have anything?
What Aaron said.
Yes. All right. Well, and if you guys think of anything else, as we go, but I do want to open it up at this point to the audience, and I think Nick has been going through as we've been chatting and making sure that everybody has access to their microphone, so everybody should have the ability to talk. But we wanted to ask kind of what have been your challenges so far in creating forms and getting those electronic signatures.
They evidently don't have any challenges.
Yeah, but
That's good.
If you don't have any challenges, but you have have some answers, let's toss those out here too.
My name is Wendy.
Hey, Wendy, yay.
So basically, we put digital signatures on most all of our forms. And my understanding is that process is not accessible. And that's all I've ever known. So it was really helpful for you to show us what happens when you try to go in and do that process. And I think probably the biggest challenge right there is probably setting up the signature initially. And then I would think that after that, the person will be able to use that preset signature. So.
Yes, setting up that signature. At this point, I can't even go in and set up a new one for some reason with the keyboard only access. So once it's set up, that process can definitely be a little easier.
So when it comes to documents like a release of information, most medical facilities will accept a signature.
Might just be me, but Wendy, I think you're breaking up.
Okay, hold on.
Excuse me.
Is that any better?
There we go. Yeah. We'll see if it stays stable because you start out strong and then it tends to fade a little. So.
And I've been having weird internet issues today. So what was I saying? With our releases of information, we have some medical facilities, major ones, that won't accept the digital signature, the printed version. You have to have that handwritten signature. So that presents a challenge trying to do that digitally.
Yes, and that has been a matter of advocacy. For me, it has been, that advocacy component and saying to them, I understand the privacy component that and the legal requirements for privacy, but there are also legal requirements for accessibility. And this is the way that has been or is accessible, and giving them different resources to validate those. I know they don't like I talked about the one where I click and drag my signature into a spot. They don't like those, but they can't. They will accept the token signature, and there are different ways for them to validate those tokens. So but you bring up a great point though. Sometimes it's not always about your clients or customers and their ability to sign. It's also about that compatibility and networking with your other partners. In this case, it's the medical professionals, and understanding their requirements, and it might be worth having those discussions with some of the other partners and stakeholders that you exchange signatures with to see what they are doing and not do, kind of recreate the wheel, so to speak. Excellent. Thank you, Wendy.
Yeah, thank you.
Anybody else? Questions, comments to share? We've got about 15 minutes left, and I'm okay wrapping up early if you want to, but I also want to make sure folks have the opportunity presenting questions. Now, Bridget would also be able to take some notes and be able to help the Adobe Days folks prepare potentially something a little bit more specific. And the Idaho Digital Accessibility Consortium. So Nick and I are working to bring WebAIM to Idaho State employees in July. WebAIM is an internationally recognized organization that does accessibility, both document and web accessibility training full-time. This is their full-time job. It's not on the volunteer basis like what we are doing here with IDAC. And I know they are working on trying to customize their training to potential attendees' needs as well. So those questions, we can work those into future trainings. And we can also help, of course, as always, help do some research and find some technical assistance and guidance if none of us know the answers off the top of our heads. So please, please, please feel free to jump in.
They had a question.
Okay, go ahead.
So let's say you have a document that a set company asks you to sign with basically an agreement. Do you find it difficult with screen readers as far as, let's say, between DocuSign, Adobe, to be able to read the document and or just sign the document?
That all comes down to, I think, the accessibility of the document. I have had some documents through DocuSign that were image only PDFs. So I was not able to access them, but I was able to access the signature process. So if you're looking at different signature services to implement within an organization, I would definitely take a look at their accessibility documentation, their accessibility statements. On our resources slide, I have a link to DocuScan specifically. Let me see if I can grab that and drop it in the chat.
Okay, thank you. They
have done a lot over the last year, and in their own documentation, they tell folks you need to make your own PDF accessible. We might be able to make the signature accessible, but we don't make your documents accessible.
So to follow up on that, as you said, you might be able to go ahead with the process, but let's say you go in, for example, Adobe, and you pick the accessibility and it says select if you're using a screen reader. Have you found that maybe not using that and just using your screen reader regularly reads through the, information off of a page that you're signing versus the end game where you're just trying to do the signature portion?
It's really going to depend on how the document was created. Again, it comes down to whether or not it was text or an image, whether the text has been tagged,
Right.
And usually that little screen pops up that says, we detect that you're using a screen reader. That pops up if it's an untagged text document.
What I've found,
go ahead, Earl.
Sorry, this is Earl.
Go ahead.
What I've found too is that when, as a creator, when you choose that accessibility option, more often than not, the screen reader user is able to actually read the form field tags and things like that. Whereas if you don't choose that option, a lot of times it won't read those form field tags. So I might be on a field, but I don't know, am I supposed to write my name there, put a date in there, put my hobbies and preferences? I don't know. So
yeah, what the tooltips, because the automatic tagging that can be done of text documents for screen reader users may or may not recognize form fields, may or may not identify tooltips. So it goes back to all the things we've talked about in the previous training sessions about phrasing questions, organizing questions, and last week, well, not last week, 2 weeks ago, our last live session, those tooltips, how important those tooltips are, because you can't count on the assistive technology to interpret all of that.
Thank you.
I guess one other thing to point out too is for agencies who are using Adobe Sign as their signature process, the signature process is completely separate from reading the document. So if you have a document where you want the client to print their name, I, Earl Hoover, agree that I have read blah, 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 right? I got to print my name in that I blank. Those fields with Adobe Sign, those fields are all separate from the document. So I'm getting those fields, and that's where those tooltips come in really handy, because I'm not getting access to those fields in the context of the overall document and where they are in the document. I can either read the body content, or I can fill out the blanks and sign my signature, but I can't do them both at the same time.
And that may be, well, that's going to be unique to requesting digital only signatures. So that process is going to be a little bit different if you're trying to put together a form that can either be printed, handwritten, and scanned back, or completed electronically, all in one go. So unfortunately, again, we don't have one right answer for how you need to request signatures in a PDF form. There's quite a bit to it. Those services typically they typically present the document completely separate from the form, and the form is handled in a very different way, like Earl was describing. All right, I want to go ahead and wrap up. Unless anybody, I'm going to give folks a few more moments here for maybe one more question, but we are coming up on the top of the hour.
a really quiet group this week.
It is. And it's a hard topic. All right. Well, in conclusion then, don't forget you can self-enroll in the Canvas self-paced version of this. So if this is the first session you've been able to join, or you want a refresher on anything that we've talked about in terms of creating so far, in 2 weeks, Carolyn will be back from Florida, and she will be joining us again to present the reading order tool. And so the kind of that next step, after you have the form fields on the page, they have their tooltips, now what? And we start talking more about tags and reading order, and those are going to be very important factors in an accessible PDF document, whether it's a form or not. So that will be a really great opportunity. And as usual, Carolyn does a great job of going through and breaking down those processes and those steps. We are, Sharina and I are trying to figure out how we are going to do the Zoom drop-in next week. If anybody needs help, we will be there one way or the other. So if you're in the Canvas, we should be able to use that Zoom link, and any notes. If you need that link, you can always get a hold of Nick. Our challenge for this week, because there's not anything really tangible to do, we are encouraging folks to start these discussions within your own teams, organizations, and agencies, and start figuring out what will work for your specific situations. If you happen to be working on a form that is, you've been putting together, you want some feedback on it, feel free to upload that into the Canvas site. And those of us who are moderating will be able to take a look at those and give some feedback. And yep, so our next optional drop-in is on May 13th. That link shows on the slide here. We can drop it in the chat if anybody needs it. It's also on the Zoom site. Thank you everybody for joining us. Jessica, thank you for our captions. And I apologize, I am fading quickly over here. So again, huge thanks to Earl for jumping in here last minute with us, and Aaron for pushing through those technical challenges to get in here with us. Appreciate it. Thank you. I hope I feel better soon as well. Thank you for putting those